Hello, I'm Chris Fenton. Welcome to the Loyal Homes Podcast, episode 7. I'm joined today by Vittoria Solda, and today we're going to be talking to home buyers about hidden problems that come up in houses sometimes, or hidden problems that we see, things to look out for. Thanks for joining us again, Vittoria.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to be here and to talk about some real estate.
So let's dive right in. My first question for you is, when a buyer walks into a home and says, "This looks great," what should they be looking out for? What are some of the hidden things that they might be looking out for?
Yeah, Chris, thanks. I think really big ticket items like looking at the foundations, seeing if there's any major cracks in the foundations, looking at perimeter drains, what era are they from, seeing if we can see anything from looking at the roof just visually. Those are a couple big things just to start it off with that could be issues that we would want to pay attention to.
Yeah, it's so easy to get pulled in and look at the all the cosmetics, the things that make us excited about a house, right? The flooring
Yes.
and the paint and
hmm
the kitchens, but it's the things you just mentioned that's where the problems can come in, and that's really where a lot of the value of a home is, right?
That's right.
So here's a good one. What are the most expensive problems that tend to be completely invisible during a showing?
So, a roof seems to be one of the most expensive ones. Perimeter drains, maybe what the heating source might be. If there's any deficiencies, like larger ones that are disclosed in the property disclosure statement that we look at beforehand.
Yeah. And roof is an interesting one because it's not hidden, but it really is. It's really hard to tell the difference between a roof with 1 year left and a roof with 10 years left from the ground, right?
Yes, exactly. And not only just the outside of the roof, in the attic space, that's another place that we don't see. Crawl spaces, too. Those are another place that we don't actually get to go into when we're just doing a tour of the property typically.
Okay, so before we dig into some of these items more specifically, do you think newer homes are safer from hidden issues than older homes?
I would say yes. A lot of the issues that we are seeing in home inspections are on older homes. Not that they are completely safe. There could be some other things that might happen if it wasn't properly built, depending on if it was a homeowner builder and if proper permits were pulled. So I would say most of the time they are, but there are some areas where they may not be, right?
Yeah, I agree. Generally speaking, they are safer. There's less issues that go wrong, but I built a brand new house, and the first time it rained heavily, the perimeter drains failed. So
Mm,
it can happen, right? It can definitely
yes.
happen. So let's get into the stuff that's underground or behind the walls. How big a deal are underground oil tanks and perimeter drains, BC? So two separate things. Let's talk about each one.
Okay. So let's start with oil tanks. Oil tanks is a heating source that was common in the 1960s and before that. And a lot of properties, they would bury them and decommission them and just leave them in the ground. These are concerns when you're a buyer. There are signs of buried oil tanks that you can often see, and there's signs that sometimes you cannot see. So walking around the property looking for evidence like that. Home inspectors also can look at areas where they may be concerned for a buried oil tank. Getting any kind of previous listing history to see if there was oiled heat is very helpful too as well. We recommend doing oil tank scans.
So let's talk about this. Let me explain this a little bit. As she said, it was common for an oil tank to be buried. She said it was common to be decommissioned. So there was a time when people were instructed to just empty it out, fill it up with sand, and leave it buried. And that was an okay thing to do. It's not anymore. The danger here is that if that oil tank still has oil in it and water gets into it or the oil gets out, it starts to pollute the ground. And that can be a very expensive fix, can't it?
Absolutely. Yes, the most straightforward ones are about $20,000 to have them removed professionally and have them remediated, but they can be upwards. I've seen ones up to $100,000 just because it went into septic fields and other areas. So it's a really unknown risk as a buyer. So it's important to put the condition in to do the oil tank scan on properties that this may happen to. And also, it takes quite a bit of time depending on the type of year. Lots of times they can't even remove them if the grounds are too wet. So depending on that, there's conditions that we can obviously address if we do find one.
Now, I talked about perimeter drains. I had that personal experience. Perimeter drains are another big deal because in my career, and I'm sure in yours, there's been many times where people buy a house, didn't get the perimeter drains scope because that wasn't always done, especially in the old days. And then the rains come. So talk a little bit about perimeter drains and why it's important to have them inspected.
Yeah, so some of the homes actually were built with no perimeter drains. That was really common back then too as well. And then a lot of the homes prior to the 70s were built with concrete perimeter drains, which was great for that time. And then they found deficiencies with those. So they came out with a new perimeter drain, which was the Big O perimeter drains. And they were great too until they found deficiencies with those. So now we are looking at the PVC perimeter drain for the latest up to code one. Anytime we see the older drains or no perimeter drains, that's when we start to dig into it a little bit deeper.
So whenever I'm at a house and I'm pricing a house and I'm walking around, I'm first looking for, is there drains or do the downspouts just point away from the house? That's a flag. Next one you're looking for is, what is the pipe sticking up out of the ground that the downspouts are going into? It's important to note, just because you see PVC doesn't mean the drains are all PVC, and that's why it's important to get them scoped too.
Yeah, that's a good point, Chris. It could just be the surface level of those, so not going all the way down.
So what are some early warning signs that perimeter drains may be beginning to fail?
When you're going into a basement or entering a crawl space, you can see some signs of the moisture. It's a white residue to see if they've had any kind of previous moisture. If there's current moisture issues and it's the rainy season, pooling water would be an obvious sign too as well.
Yeah, exactly. It usually starts out with a little bit of seepage and then it breaks loose at some point.
If you're having those older concrete drains or even the Big O drain type, having a drain scope is really important to see how they're working.
Yeah. So let's shift gears now to property lines. How often do property line issues create real legal or financial problems for clients in your experience?
Uh, I'd say that a lot of our property lines are out. They're just not recently surveyed. And so they're more like a city plot plan, if you will. So unless you see actual new survey pins and have documentations for a survey, those are questions to definitely explore more, because it could be that the home is encroaching on the other property or vice versa.
I think it's important that we're doing this topic of all these things that can go wrong, and I'm glad people will have this resource to watch, but it's important to understand that these things don't happen all the time. And the overriding goal here is to show you that there's ways to find out if these are issues, there's ways to investigate it. Property lines are a tricky one though, because without an actual site survey that a lot of properties don't have, there's no way to know for sure. And you definitely can't go look at a hedge or a fence and say that's the property line. We have no way of knowing if that's accurate or not.
That's true. It's a really common questions that potential buyers ask. Where's the property lines? And without having that survey, as you say, we can't know for sure. We are going off of what the seller is telling us.
You don't always need to know. You don't always need to get a survey. That's not what we're saying, but you need to be looking at your surroundings. Do you have a shop that's pretty close to a property line? That's a big one. Outbuildings being too close to a property line or even over a property line.
Or if you know that your buyer is looking at building a fence, they have kids and a dog, and that's their intention to build a fence when they take possession. So just talking about the cost of surveys and letting them know that's going to be something that's most likely needed to be able to proceed with that.
Totally. Now let's talk plumbing and wiring. What are we looking for with plumbing and wiring?
So plumbing, things that we aren't looking for, we don't want any galvanized plumbing in there. That's the big one that was, again, up to code back in the 60s, but then started to fail. And so every time we get a new code for what's required is because things started to be deficient. Wiring, we are not looking for knob and tube wiring. That's the one that we definitely do not want to be seeing in a home. And if we do see it in a home, we're looking at how to address that.
Now, for everyone out there that's working with a real estate advisor to buy a house, your real estate advisor might not be an expert on all of these things. This is definitely something for an inspector to look at as best as you can. You want to go and see if you can see the plumbing, can you see the wiring, and take a look at these things before you spend the money on an inspection.
And more to the note of wiring, to go to code now is having a 100 amp service panel. 200 amp is the normal in the new builds, but even in an older home, having anything less than 100 amp, you can have issues when going to insure the home.
Yeah, we see some crazy things. We've seen fuses outside on a panel under the deck.
Pretty neat to see the old systems, but not when you're buying a house.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hot water tanks come up all the time when we're doing deals. We get an inspection and a hot water tank comes up as being expired. Why does it matter? What's the fix?
Hot water tanks for insurance, they typically want to see it no older than 10 years old. Otherwise, they'd like you to replace it. And they will usually give you about a 30-day time frame, but it's something to know when you're looking at an older hot water tank.
Sometimes they'll be written on the tank. You can look for that. And then some tanks, not all tanks are the same. Some tanks are actually just a 6-year life. So if you're expired on that particular tank, it's going to need to be replaced. It's not something to mess around with, because when a hot water tank blows, it blows from the inside. There's no real warning signs usually, and it can make a pretty good mess. So it's not an expensive thing, but it is something to keep an eye on.
Absolutely.
Okay, now we're going into some other stuff. The looks fine problem. If it looks good, but you find some stuff deeper in. So what about rot and mold? Rot and mold often hide in plain sight. Where do you see them most commonly?
In the attic space, we have lots of rain, and if attic spaces aren't ventilated properly or to today's code, we get the hot and the moisture in there, and quite commonly we see kind of mold-like spores in the attic space on the sheeting.
Super common in the attic. You can see it in crawl space too. We sell houses everything from turn of the 1900s to brand new houses. So when we're having these conversations, we're going in our head to these different houses we've seen over the years. In older houses, you think about a house, it sort of acts like a chimney. If you have those dirt crawl spaces, which you see in some of these 30s and 40s houses, that water will actually wick its way right up to the attic and through the walls and stuff like that. So you can run into it in those houses all over the place.
Yes, absolutely. Definitely seen a fair share of those too as well. So, having those vapor barriers down and having the ventilation properly in the crawl spaces is huge too.
So what happens if you find mold? Is it a deal breaker? How do you see it?
It depends on the buyer's comfort level. Typically, we get a professional come in, assess the situation, give a quote on what it looks like to remediate it, and see how the buyer feels about it. Sometimes it's a renegotiation with the seller. Sometimes the buyer's just not comfortable with it and doesn't proceed with it. And other times we come to an agreement which they're quite happy and proceed with it.
People have very different feelings about mold. Some people feel like, well, this is the West Coast and there's mold everywhere. And other people are sure that it's a major health concern. And all those points of view are valid for sure. Asbestos. So how common is it? Why is it a problem?
So pretty much any home prior to 2000 right now can contain some type of asbestos, right? So there's Health Canada and WorkSafe BC have two polar opposite views on it. One of them says, get it out of your house. You can't have it anywhere. And the other one says, if you don't disturb it, it's fine. So it really depends on, again, how the buyer feels about that. But it's a conversation that we have going into it and just letting them know that when there's areas that we think can contain asbestos, common is vermiculite in the attic, right? A type of insulation can contain asbestos. A lot of the times it does. It's one of those times where some people just live with it like that the whole time and others want it out of their house. And how do we do that? So there's things to think about, drywall and the drywall tape, all of that stuff. There's common like on ducting on furnaces, like just a few examples, right? It was in over 3,000 products when they were using it. It was a very fire safe product to use, and then later found out the harm it caused.
Again, a very personal thing that people feel two ends of a spectrum about. How often do you see non-permitted work, and why is it such a risk?
We do see it quite often. It should be disclosed by the seller. Sometimes it's not disclosed, and we kind of figure it out going through and checking with the city or regional district and pulling the permits on file. But it is something, it's a deficiency that should be disclosed. And if you are purchasing a property as a buyer and there's something work done without a permit, it's something that you now have to move forward and disclose when you go to sell it. And for some people, that can be a big issue.
Yeah, legally has to be disclosed. So non-permitted work is when you're doing things like electrical, plumbing, structural, these types of things. Really common in British Columbia. Wiring, small wiring things. You see it all the time where people wire their own house because they feel like they have those skills, but they're doing it without permit. So it's a super common one. Do you think sellers always know? I mean, they have to disclose it by law, but do they always know that there was permitted work, or do they inherit it sometimes?
Sometimes they inherit it, so a lot of times they don't know. A lot of times, too, people are really unclear what is to be permitted work. And they might add something and not realize that they should have pulled a permit for it. So there's also a clarity thing walking through the house when you see open walls, an open concept kitchen in an older house, like questions and things to look for. And again, years ago, it wasn't required to pull a permit. So that's another thing, too. When the work was done, it may have not been a time where it was required.
And people assume, sometimes people get professionals to do work and they assume a permit was pulled and it wasn't. A heat pump installed once professionally by a reputable company. And when we went to sell it, we went to pull the permit. We realized that there was no permit. So sellers need to be disclosing it listing agents need to be asking their clients about this and talking about it. When we list a property, we do that in detail. But buyers need to be looking for those red signs that you just mentioned and then start looking for permits as well.
Absolutely. Asking lots of questions. And as a real estate professional, like that's one of our jobs is to help you with looking out for what you need to look for, right? And asking those questions for you. So
I think it gives you the really good idea why you want to be really comfortable with your real estate professional. If this conversation does anything for you, the listener, it's that you want to be making sure you're working with somebody like Vittoria who has these answers and understands all of these things. Some of that is training, but a lot of it comes with experience. So I'm going to shift gears now and I'm going to talk about the neighborhood factor. This is an interesting one when you talk about hidden problems. What are some hidden issues that have nothing to do with the house itself?
So one example, I guess, would be if there's a high crime rate in the neighborhood that you might not be aware of by just looking at a house, areas to look for that and find out. Working with a local agent that really knows those neighborhoods really well.
Another thing that comes to mind is changes in the neighborhood. Maybe there's a public housing project going a block over and you're unaware of it, but you need to be aware of these things because those types of things can change the landscape of a neighborhood too and affect property value.
Absolutely.
So how do buyers go and uncover neighborhood problems? Like you can't know everything, but how do you do your due diligence in the neighborhood?
So working with their local realtor is usually helpful just for the common knowledge there, and checking with the city and seeing what's the plans of the future for the community there and where they're looking. So any developments that are in the works, it's just the starting process.
A simple one is go walk around. Take some time and walk around the neighborhood, drive around the neighborhood, see what it sounds like. Go there at different times of day. What's it like when school's out? What's it like at night? When you're getting close to really wanting a property, you want to know, what does your neighbor's property look like? How are they keeping their yard? Is that how you keep your yard? So there's things you can do from that point of view too.
Yeah, that's a really good point too. Different types of day to be there and how busy the street is really, right? And how many people are walking around and all of those good points.
Yeah, totally. Switching gears again. So infestation and environmental issues. How common are infestations on Vancouver Island?
Pests, rodents, those are pretty common here. Again, a lot of water helps with those. And I think that going through the inspection and seeing what damage they have done is really the bigger question you're looking at. If it's something that's just happened recently and there isn't a lot of damage, then getting an exterminator in to be able to deal with it and getting receipts for the work done is usually pretty easy. But if they've got into the wood and there's some more damage happening, some tunneling in circulation, like all certain things like that, right? So having a good home inspector with a thermal camera to be able to find these things out, to find out what's going on behind the walls is really important. And then if there is an issue, having a qualified exterminator to come in and assess it.
I've been at this over 20 years now, and the infestation issue, I think, is getting worse over time. Certainly, rodents seem to be more prevalent. Rats seem to be more prevalent. And we think of rats being in like sort of bad neighborhoods, but that's not true at all. I mean, they're everywhere these days. And the other thing we see, cockroaches is a fairly new thing. We run into that now. We never used to run into that. Bed bugs is another possible infestation. Tend to see those more in income producing units than homes, but not always. So knowing what to look for, bats, there's a few things. So again, the seller's supposed to disclose this, correct?
That's correct, yeah.
And all of these different critters leave.
There's a question on the property disclosure statement that addresses this. So as a buyer, you can look at that. But often the seller doesn't know they have an issue. And so they may have ticked off no issue and they have not been in their attic space or their crawl space or any of those areas. Sometimes it's a surprise to everybody.
But they all do leave signs, and you may not know because you may not be in your attic, but your inspector, if you have a good inspector, they should notice these things. Most of these things get caught in inspection the vast majority of the time.
That's right. Yeah, they do, and I've seen really small issues and really big issues.
So that's my next question. When does an infestation become a deal breaker versus a fixable issue?
When it affects the structure of the building. I guess I can't say that for everybody it's a deal breaker, but for a lot of people it would be. And most of the situations I've seen have been fixable and able to remediate, but there are some ones that it's too unknown and you can't see everything and the risk is too high for the buyer.
Yeah, totally. I would agree with that entirely. If you could give buyers one rule to protect themselves from hidden issues, what would it be?
Get a good home inspection.
That's it right there.
Really, yeah, that's the big thing. Get a good home inspection, and if there are signs that there's more issues, because inspections are generalists, and they'll advise you to go to a specialist if it's out of their area, and do your due diligence and continue on with that so that you can get as many of your questions answered and see how comfortable you are with moving forward.
Yeah. We can notice a lot of these things in general walkthroughs, these hidden issues. So it starts there on a second showing when you're really honing in on a house, really starting to get to look at things, but you can't skip the inspection. I would say I don't care how competitive the market is, I'd be very careful buying a house without a good inspection.
I absolutely agree. We are not in the crawl spaces. If they have one, we are not in the attic spaces. We aren't behind the walls. As much as we can try and see as many deficiencies as we can, they can get into a whole lot of other areas and are qualified to make those determinations too.
We understand a lot of this from experience, but you said inspectors are generalists, not specialists. Well, we aren't even inspectors.
Right.
We're real estate advisors, right? We help you negotiate, we help you find a house. So you need to rely on specialists. For sellers, what types of hidden issues should be addressed before going to market as opposed to disclosing and going to market?
If you know there's a buried oil tank, that is something that you should deal with. If you have 70 amp service, there's a conversation we can have about what that looks like to have that completed before going to market to attract more buyers. And if it's not an option, to disclose it, right?
I think it's really case by case basis. Every person's circumstance is different. So, in a perfect world, you don't disclose anything because you fix it all. But everyone's financial situation, timeline, everything is different. So, it really is an individual conversation you should have with your real estate advisor. But I agree, things like buried oil tanks, you want to deal with that before you disclose it. It's going to ultimately be more affordable for you to deal with it that way, which is probably true of most of these things. Financially, if you can deal with it, it's probably going to save you money as opposed to discounting the property to sell it with the issue.
Yes, absolutely.
So I hope we haven't scared everybody off. Thank you, everybody, for joining us on this podcast. I hope this was really good information about some of the pitfalls and some of the hidden things to look out for. It's not that scary a world out there. Most houses are great houses. Most houses don't have these issues, but you do want to be aware. So thanks, Vittoria, for going through this with us, and we're looking forward to talking with everybody at our next episode.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. Looking forward to it.